I just want to move on then to the next panel. The next topic is how AI tools can be used to make health services more accessible, affordable, and inclusive. The speakers are Scott Nowson, he's the Director of Digital Services in PwC UAE, and Karim Dakki, and he's the CEO or co-founder at KLAIM, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's moderated by my colleague Ahmad Nabeel. He's the fellow innovator under 35 as well from 2019, and he's the founder and CEO of Gulf Medical Technologies.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. From Will Smith iRobot movie back in 2004 to Google's acquisition of DeepMind for $500 million and Medtronic's purchase of digital surgery and another $500 million deal. Artificial intelligence is no longer a science fiction. It is already impacting many aspects of life, including healthcare. In this very exciting session, we will be talking with our guest speakers about how AI tools can make health services more accessible, affordable, and inclusive. And we're pleased to have two brilliant and renowned AI experts who are joining us today to help answer some of these questions by sharing some useful insights from their extensive experience with artificial intelligence, specifically in healthcare. With us today, our first guest, Scott Nowson, who is a subject matter expert in AI. He did his bachelor's degree in computer science and artificial intelligence at the University of Edinburgh. He then completed his master's degree in cognitive science and natural language and a PhD in informatics, both from the University of Edinburgh as well. He has previously worked in the healthcare sector for pharmaceutical and petrochemical industries. Dr. Scott is currently the lead for PwC in AI in the Middle East. Our second guest speaker is Karim Dakki. He's a serial entrepreneur and a finance expert with a master's degree in computer science from ISEP in Paris and an MBA from the University of Virginia. Karim has previously founded a telecommunication company now valued at $700 million. He is currently working on his latest venture, KLAIM, which makes the healthcare billing system a lot simpler for healthcare providers by harvesting the power of AI. Welcome, Scott and Karim. We are very excited to have you with us today. First, we would like to get to know you a little better. So it would be great to learn about what you do. Let's start with you, Scott.
Thank you, Ahmed, and thank you to MIT Tech Review for inviting us to this event. It's really exciting. So within PwC, my role is essentially to help clients understand and activate AI. So that goes from a more educational perspective in terms of what is AI, being realistic about its capabilities and expectations, and trying to help them see through the hype, through figuring out where they can apply AI in their industry, in their businesses, for customers, front office, back office, and then helping them actually build it. So going all the way from strategy through execution by being able to then implement AI for our clients.
That sounds very exciting. Thank you for the introduction, Scott. Karim, now to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Ahmed, and very excited to help share some insights about the application of AI in healthcare. So what we do at KLAIM is we streamline medical billing. When we look at the excess administrative burden to manage medical claims for healthcare providers in the US, it's reaching a staggering figure of $250 billion annually. So what we are doing is, removing the complexity and the extensive amount of manual work, automating these processes using AI. And second is using the data to be able to make investment decisions and provide working capital to healthcare providers by assessing the risk, basically.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Karim, and we're pleased to have you. Scott, you are the Director of Artificial Intelligence at PwC for the Middle East. Can you tell us how AI plays into what you do?
So, as I said, there's really those two lenses to it. So we definitely look at internally where we can apply AI and other emerging technologies in some of our own processes. So we're perhaps well known for being a tax and audit firm. So we will explore how can we use AI for automating certain audit processes, how to make businesses more efficient. But ultimately what we then do, particularly in the consulting business in which I sit, is how can we then do that for clients? As I said, it's looking at where AI can be used and how people can do it in the right way. So with healthcare, for example, we might work with a regulator, or we might work with a payer, we might work with a provider, we might work with clients across the spectrum. And it's about finding what are the valuable use cases? What are the instances that they could use AI for? Is it going to be a back office process, like Karim just mentioned, something where there's a repetitive task? Can we find AI to automate that? You know, AI as an extension of an RPA-like technology to do that automation. But that can then go to customer or patient facing, you know, looking at a virtual assistant, you know, for sort of virtual healthcare, virtual care, you know, can we build capabilities or recommend capabilities in that space? It really is just helping clients navigate the world of AI, because it's not one thing, which is always a misconception. Can we have an AI? We know this. It's machine learning, it's computer vision, it's helping people navigate that space. Me and my team here, we act as the guide to AI and just help people figure out what they want to do with it.
And I know that PwC has a specific interest in healthcare, where they don't just help, as you said, clients or providers apply AI for diagnostic tools, but also for well-being and to prevent those who are healthy from getting sick in the first place.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're very much aligned in that sense with that notion of preventative medicine. We've undertaken some capabilities, even internally, where we've looked at well-being tools. How can we analyze the data and look for patterns of our own data and our own well-being, and building out apps to help support mental well-being. We've done some work looking at triggers and detecting patterns and trying to see if, say, as an example, from social media, can you look at detecting symptoms when people start to talk about things, when people start to feel a certain way, if you're looking at mental health space. So yeah, we're very much aligned with the various ministries' idea of moving to preventative medicine. And it's such a fascinating space that from an analytics and AI perspective, there's a lot of work that can be done there, and just finding where we can put it.
Thank you, Scott. Now we have a better understanding of what you do specifically and what PwC does in the AI sphere. Karim, I want to go back to you now. You recently closed a pre-Series A round of investment for KLAIM. Congratulations on that. And we know KLAIM helps healthcare providers reduce their claim processing costs and timeline from insurers, which can sometimes take quite a long time. Why did you decide to utilize AI for building your technology?
When we got the idea, I was having a coffee with my co-founder at one of the co-working spaces, and he's having a medical billing background. I have a finance background, and I was asking him, okay, so what do you do? He was telling me that he's helping these smaller healthcare providers manage their claim process and hassle with insurance companies. And I told him, is it easy to get into that with providers? He said, look, they do have claim being rejected. So what we do is we help them recover those claims. And that's when we prove that we can do that, they give us the rest of the job. And I asked him, so you have people that do these things manually and know how to distinguish between a good claim and a bad claim? He said, yes. I said, what if we buy them, and when we get the machine to learn how your team, your humans, are making these these decisions to detect which is a good claim from a bad claim. And that's how the idea started. So initially it was really to be able to do it at scale, because you don't want to, for having a scalable business, you need to automate. And back to Scott's point is, you really need to define a very specific use case and see whether or not with data, this is something that you can be able to automate or find patterns with. So two things important: limiting the use case, has to be very precise in terms of what you expect from AI. And second is the data. If you don't have a large volume of data, then there is no AI. So the next challenge was, okay, well, that's great. Now, where is the data for us to train this? And we were very lucky because the government of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, as a matter of fact, has digitalized the health exchanges already. And therefore, the data was available. So it was just a matter for us to go and chase these healthcare provider and tell them, okay, create an account on our platform, create an account on our platform. That gave us, initially, was like, it was very slow. 100,000 claims was not enough. 200,000 claims, then 500,000 claims, and then when we started raising funds, now we reached like 36 million medical activities, and now you can start doing interesting things with AI.
So you actually went from doing the R&D to applying AI for KLAIM.
It's essentially, you never know what the outcome is going to be when you start an AI journey. You have a hypothesis that AI can help. You need to find the data, and you need to get your data science team to work on it to see if they can extract, models that have very good, KPIs. And at that point in time, if you have a good accuracy or recalls or things like that, then you know that you can use these models to predict or do whatever decision you want them to make. But it is not a given. You can end up working 6-12 months on a project, and then the results could not be very satisfactory. So it's very, very much a hit and miss journey.
Scott, I want to go back to you now, and one thing we hear about AI in terms of how much investment there is in the field, and some of the money spent to develop the algorithms, and the costs for running AI, such as DeepMind, costing Google over $500 million annually. With such a high barrier, how can this technology be helpful in healthcare?
Well, that's a really interesting statistic, Ahmed, that made the rounds like this time last year in the news. It was a big splashy, and it was sort of one of those dystopian AI headlines that we always see, like on the negative side of things. But you have to step back and look at who DeepMind are. And they have set out to be a research organization looking to further the field. That's a huge, ambitious target, and that is going to cost money. If you want to change the way AI works and its capabilities, that's going to cost huge amounts of money. But that's not what everybody needs to do. I think Karim hit the nail on the head around that, focusing on a use case. But DeepMind is out here, but adopting AI is really very much about picking what you want to do. Diabetic retinopathy, for example, and automating the scanning and the understanding of the eye image, like picking a use case like that. Yes, there's still a data cost. Yes, there is still a computational cost, but that's an investment. That's an investment on any similar drug research. You're going to have to invest to come up with this new product. But if you think through your business model, if you look at what the AI is going to enable, and that's where, again, that having this use case, you can now say, this is what this transaction typically costs. This is what we need to be able to do. This is what the funding model looks like. If we can build that out of it, now you have a mathematical model of what your AI success looks like. And yet, like I said, there's still going to be an investment needed. There may be hardware, there may be infrastructure. It's a little bit better now. We can use the cloud. You can use commoditized services to try and support this. So the barriers are lowering all the time to be able to get into this space. It's just that we only hear about those really high barriers, the really big moonshots. But I think we're in a much better place than we have been ever for this.
Well, that's very reassuring to know that, we will get there, and that's a very promising technology. Karim, we know patient confidentiality is an important aspect of healthcare services provided by any clinic or hospital. AI is a data-hungry technology. How can we guarantee we don't intentionally or unintentionally disclose or compromise sensitive data that belong to the patient?
Excellent question, and this is something that we really take very seriously, because any data breach can compromise our reputation. And I think it's not only the case for us; it's any company in general that collects personal data, but it's even more acute for healthcare companies and financial services companies. So the way we've tackling this specific issue in our case is that you have international standards that deal with how to handle healthcare data and the privacy. So you have the US standard called HIPAA, and you have the European standard called GDPR. So these two standards are fairly strict when it comes to data privacy in general, but specifically, for healthcare. So how do we make sure that we do have the full amount of data that is needed so that the healthcare providers can manage the claims of a patient, but at the same time, the data science team manages that they, get to have access to the data without having access to confidential data. So we build what we call data pipelines, and today the big data technology allow you to do it fairly quickly. So from from same source of information, you can have multiple data pipelines. So one data pipeline is going to go to the web app that is very restricted, very few people have access to it, and only healthcare providers have access to the full extent of the data. And then you have another data pipeline that goes and removes all what we call PII, personal identification information, and store it in data lakes. And this is where the data science team they don't care what Emirate ID is or who is the person. They're not supposed to know. But in our case, what matters is the date of payment of insurance company, the diagnosis, the response of insurance companies to this diagnosis, and the timing for those responses. So this data, there's nothing sensitive per se, because and that's how we manage to basically protect the data and be able to offer in one area very protected access to sensitive data, and allow our data science team to operate and build the algorithm on data that is important but not very sensitive.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. This is a very important aspect in any healthcare settings, anywhere around the world. Scott, back to you now. There's a group of researchers in the United States who try to use AI to develop an algorithm that can predict the starting dose for warfarin, which is an anticoagulant medication used to treat or to prevent diseases like blood clots. So what they found is that not only did the AI algorithm not perform as well as a simple clinical algorithm, but it also was actually worse in predicting the starting dose for specifically African American population, and that's because this population specifically was underrepresented in the data set. How can we avoid such biases when it comes to AI in healthcare?
And that's a really good question. And bias is something we see in a lot of different applications. There's similar stories in financial modeling and giving loans, having racial bias embedded. And it's a really interesting debate that I see all over my Twitter feed all the time between where is the bias? Is it in the data? Is it in the people? Is it in the model? And I don't think there's really a right answer about where it is. It's sort of everywhere. We embed our own biases. It's in the underrepresentation of the data. But the solution is the awareness that these sort of issues exist, that there can be bias in the data. And one way of looking at it is you can look at it through automated toolkits, right? So we have our PwC Responsible AI Toolkit. And in fact, our digital trust leader, Matt White, is going to be talking after this session about responsible AI broadly. But within that, there's tools and a toolkit you can use to run through your data to look for biases. But you can just do it, first of all, as the human on the other end. One of the panelists before spoke about sort of empathy in AI. And it really is that notion of understanding that this is data about people, and it's an interesting balance between what Karim was just saying of the PII and removing certain data because you don't need it in your system. You don't need race to make certain classifications, but you need to understand that it's in the data and it represents us. You need to think through it. And so there are then There are statistical options for finding it. There are, within the research, there's many different approaches: undersampling, oversampling, rebalancing data sets that you can do while training the model. But I think fundamentally, it just all comes down to having that awareness when you set out to actually be aware that this could occur in your data and needing to be able to think through it.
Thank you.
To what Scott was saying is that the data has inherent biases, and it's very dangerous to think that because it's AI, it knows better. It will amplify the biases.
Yes.
And that's something we've seen it with this whistleblowing story with the Facebook, with Frances when she came and she said, look, that they knew that the algorithms were biased, and it was very difficult for them to correct the biases that on hate speech and things like that. So the again is you can only do AI if you have a data set, and that data set by default is never going to be perfect. So it's very important to always step back and understand, what are the inherent issues with that data set that's going to give you a conclusion that you may not want to, to take.
And I think it's acknowledging that, interestingly. One thing I always say with AI is machine learning is always going to be based on data, but sometimes you want to wrap it in rules and you want to wrap it in things, and knowing that those biases are potentially, you can know to look for them. You can have some sort of rules before or after processing the data just to double check, just like you would audit, if you will, audit a human's processing or go through someone's tax record. You can audit these AI algorithms to check and see what that's happening, because Karim's right. The model itself is just going to take what comes in and put it straight back out again. It's not going to fix it.
On that note, Karim, I would like to ask you, AI requires a lot of computing power. And what is the expectation here? Can we realistically expect all healthcare settings in different countries and regions to have the capability to run these algorithms? And how can we make sure we're actually making healthcare services more affordable than expensive?
Very, very good point. And I've been thinking through this problem quite a lot, because the healthcare provider sits on tons of data, but healthcare data is extremely complex and requires very, very advanced data science techniques, very advanced data engineering techniques. So essentially, there is no way that small or mid-sized provider, even large providers, perhaps in this part of the world, that's going to be able to harness the power of AI. So the conclusion that I came up with is perhaps making it available, or making at least available the infrastructure for any of these providers to feed in the data. And then you have apps developers like us that build specific use case to help them solve this, like an Apple Store for your mobile, but it would be like an healthcare data store and an open health exchange. You see this is ultimately my dream, because look, we are just one way of monetizing the data is looking at the claims and whether or not it makes sense for us to buy them and invest in them. But that's just one use case. But imagine that we are building an open infrastructure that injects the text data as an input, whether it's financial claim data or clinical medical data, and then you can have zillions of applications that are very specific, and that's always the important point with AI, very specific, that are going to respond to one particular problem, but does it better than a human. But so my point is that there is no way on earth, I believe, that healthcare providers are going to be able to do this on their own. But it's a massive opportunity for people that to create specific use cases on top of data infrastructure that should be open more and more. So when you look at what's happening in the US, there is this open health thing going on, and there are regulations that are forcing this interoperability to happen between the providers, so that me as a patient, I can have access to my data, but I can share my data, and and I can stimulate innovation and creativity around that data. Today, the data is stuck in HIS systems in healthcare, and it's very difficult to make a good use of it.
Allowing data to be shared more openly is your suggestion to go about this.
In a controlled manner, but the
Yeah.
data should not be sitting in an HIS system. Yes.
Yes, I agree with that. Scott, we know that populations from low socioeconomic status are less likely to follow up with their medical appointments because sometimes they can't take time off work. They have to stay with their kids at home. So this eventually results in them being also underrepresented in the data sets. How can we make sure that we're making AI inclusive? Besides we being aware that these biases do exist, how can we make it more inclusive?
I mean, again, I think it comes down to, in the first instance, awareness of this, because what we've been talking about is you need the data to train a machine learning model. You have this certain sector who you're just not going to have data of because they're underrepresented. You know that. So knowing that from the start, either you can, as I've said, put rules around the system to try and amplify that data to try and deal with it, or you don't put that data through machine learning. You engage in an active process where you reach out to people in order to have them included in AI. But the other way around, so something that a former colleague of mine has been looking at in India is how to then flip that, take the technology out to those markets. So she was looking at machine learning in thermal imaging for breast cancer scanning. So completely restructuring how you would do breast cancer checks into a more portable manner, and then being able to take that to the underrepresented communities, people who can't get to a major hospital, to a major facility. So it's a little bit of both. It's being aware that people will be underrepresented and trying to find ways to solve that, but then taking the technology and doing something with it.
You can use maybe AI to try and identify these gaps and fill them in. And because we're nearing the end of the session, Karim, I would like to ask you if you have any advice for entrepreneurs who would like to venture in the artificial intelligence sphere.
It's amazing what can be done with machine learning and AI. I think the key that we should really stress on is you need to have a very narrow use case, and you need to have the data for that. So if you think that the data is going to be very, before even thinking about the venture, the next step is, okay, what is the data? And is that data going to be meaningful? And is it going to be enough? And is it going to be cost effective to gather? And if the answers to this is no, then you should probably avoid getting into AI, because the starting point is high quality digital data to be able to run numbers, and if you don't have it, you cannot go for it. So my advice is the data first and a specific use case, because AI respond better to specific use cases than general use cases.
And Karim, because you've walked down this path, do you think investors in the Middle East are excited about AI and to invest in AI, or was it more difficult than you had anticipated?
Look, I think investors like a good project, and like when you have a venture that solves a problem. So as long as you have a problem that you are solving, it could be with simple technology. Think about SendGrid. SendGrid was just solving the problem of emails being sent without going into spam. It's a multi-billion-dollar company today. It's a very simple problem that is being solved, and they've solved it in a certain way. Now, if AI can help solve that problem, that's great, but they will be more interested in the problem and the solution that you're bringing, rather than an AI they will go beyond the AI and the trendy the trendy words. They need to see a real problem being solved.
I think that's actually the key. AI is a solution looking for a problem.
Well, I think we're at the end of this session. Scott and Karim, thank you so much for this very fruitful and meaty discussion. I've learned a lot from the answers you gave today. And on that high note, I would like to thank MIT Tech Review Arabia for organizing this event and for inviting us to participate. And a big thank you for the audience for attending and for their time.